All right, we are live. So, hello everybody out there in the world. Derek, why don't you go ahead and start us off and just introduce yourself to everybody, and then yeah, we'll just go from there.
Okay, hi, my name's Derek Johnson. My first trade is still photography, and over the years I've sort of progressed into doing a fair amount of motion work. I've done everything from direct, produce, art department. My biggest success story was filming 9/11 in New York City. Got involved with HBO, and from there it spiraled about 15 feature productions that are on my resume. And Werner Herzog has, of course, been an inspiration to me as an artist for, I think, maybe my whole career, about 25 years. So I was excited to join the class and engage with people and see if I could pick up some new tricks for the trade.
Cool. Fred?
Cool. Hey, I'm Fred Sickley. I'm living in Switzerland right now. I mostly make music videos, but I'm trying to get a couple of shorts and a feature documentary off the ground next year. And yeah, that's about that's about all I have to say.
Right on. And Tom?
Hi, I'm Tom Benedict, and I'm a longtime screenwriter. I've worked on a lot of movies at studios and had a lot of jobs in independent production companies. The movie I'm best known for is Cocoon, and worked on some other things along the way that are on my IMDb and all that. And I started out, I'm also a still photographer. I've had some shows as a still photographer, and it's kind of compulsive. I started doing it because I wanted to do cinematography, and then just kept doing it. And so I've had some shows and I'm sort of, it's conceptual stuff I've done and a lot of street stuff. And I went to film school in Paris and started out trying to do sort of, with the kind of European way of independent way of making films, and ended up in Hollywood. So now I'm kind of pull myself back, make myself go back to do what I originally intended to do before my long Hollywood career did what it did to me. So
that could be a topic for a whole other, right? What Hollywood did to me.
I also teach online, and I teach at the University of Michigan right now. So.
All right, cool. Thanks guys for taking the time to do this morning or this evening, depending on where you're at. My name's Clark. Yeah, my background, I used to work in advertising and marketing and did that in kind of my first life. And then I got really, really tired of doing that. Wanted to explore storytelling in film, and I actually kind of started in theater and kind of started mostly as an actor. And so spent quite a few years doing that, and then kind of moved into more writing and then directing and producing. And then I got myself out here in Southern California and started doing that more with short films, and also kind of still pursued acting. And so now I'm working on, mostly focused on my own projects, and I do a little bit of everything wherever it's needed, whether it's editing or directing or acting even sometimes still. So just trying to get better at all of it. So anyway, there we have it. All right, guys. So it looks like here our first topic, I guess, we're going to cover lessons 15 through 19. And the first one, our discussion topic here is sound. And okay, so you guys have all watched the lessons. And in your own experiences, we can kind of talk about your experience with sound. I'll just start with our first question here, but we can move from there. Have you ever blended or distorted sounds? It's kind of a funny question, but and if so, where do you start, and how do you technically do that? Well, let's just kind of talk about our experience in sound in our own filmmaking experiences. Or anybody have any first thoughts on that? Their experience working with sound?
I've got actually a bit of experience working with sound. I've been in a few bands. I play the ukulele, and I've produced a couple of tracks. And
Yeah,
I've kind of self-taught in terms of putting sounds together. It's a lot of fun. I mean, there's an oddity. I actually find myself more able to distort things in an analog setting
Hmm.
than I am in a program. And I'm also like I really like to reverse things, which I
Hmm.
find like easiest in Premiere Pro. To just reverse something and or change the time is just such a like really easy thing to do in that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And yeah, layering sounds I think is I think in terms of like I haven't worked much with Foley that often, and I've mostly done my own stuff, and so it's not really an easy thing. You basically just have to jump in and try it out. I have a lot of fun with that stuff.
Yeah.
I like yeah, I like to do really ambient kind of things over maybe let's say a mundane shot. And it's I think once you get your gears turning, it's really easy to go off on some tangents with that. I really love doing
Yeah.
that.
Well, I know, in my own experience, I mean, when I first, started, it was, of course, like I think what happens to a lot of people, in my experience, of course, first as an audience member, you're watching films and you like really are brought into this world with the visuals. It's kind of, and of course, like you go, people are always talking about, ooh, what camera should I shoot with? Oh, I got to, 4K, da 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 da. And it's like we really have a focus on the visual. And I know in my own experience, I walked into it with that mindset that I was really focused on the visual, and wow, I didn't realize at first how important sound was, and not even just really utilizing sound in a creative way that really adds to the storytelling, but just getting the damn thing recorded. Just getting clean sound was a huge issue. Much less taking the step of actually utilizing it in a really creative way to help with your storytelling. I mean, and it's still probably what I think. I think it's, in my experience, it's much easier to get video, to get the visuals that people will, that'll be, that'll work with your storytelling as opposed to sound. And I think an audience is much less forgiving about any kind of issues with sound than they are with the visual. I mean, people talk about 4K, 5K, 6K. People will watch a 480i, or people will watch stuff with static or what. They'll watch it. But if there's any issues with sound, if it's clipped, if it's distorted, if it's got static, I mean, you'll lose and nobody will watch it. It's immediately gone.
Yeah, if you have echo or you
Yeah.
have any kind of interference where I had the problem with my my intensive final piece.
Yeah.
I was doing an interview and I listened back to it and I was so absorbed in the interview I didn't notice that my goddamn husky was singing through about half an hour of it, and it's just completely unusable
Gone.
stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
What about you guys, Derek, Tom? Your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I've been well aware of the importance of sound, and in terms of if you don't, it's going to make or break. If you don't get decent sound or good sound, the film is going to be very difficult to make. And in terms of my own keeping it on in a sensory way as I'm writing or thinking of what I'm shooting, trying to shoot, or what the image represents, I think that the way Werner talks about for me is very helpful and refreshing. And I started doing a podcast recently, and I got a Zoom H5 and some mics, and as I've been doing them, I've been sort of arcing up my ability to record sound, and I've been scrutinizing where I've just become more aware by the act of doing that, but I haven't gone out into the forest yet. And I think that this idea of counterpoint that he brings up,
Mm-hmm.
and it's really it's great for me to think about just the sound as much as the image, and what's the image going to be with a particular sound, or what can a sound, what image will inform a sound. It's great. It's really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, for me, sound is, it's been kind of an interesting journey. Like I've always been interested in the idea of creating sound, music, including sound effects. And when I started working on my own visual pieces in motion, I think one of the things I want to do is, for the sake of the discussion, was the idea of how Werner approaches sound, initially introduced in the class, was to sort of take these long walks and be really observant to things. In addition to that, certainly that helps you kind of focus in on your picture. But what I personally ended up figuring out was, I think of sound as almost like an additional lens to the project, because I think very visually. So everywhere from the technical to how it plays out conceptually in a piece. Do you want to have a pointed source of sound, like a zoom lens, or do you want to have a broad sound that encompasses the whole scene and all little pieces of sound in that? So you'll need to have a microphone that captures wider sound.
That's a really interesting way to look at it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is. I mean, you need to, as much as with your visuals, you need to create a space. And it's really easy to pan across a bar room or something like this, but if people can't hear that bar room, they can't smell it, they can't act like they can't feel like they're actually there. You know, you need to create a space with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And
That's a really good point, Derek. Like, I mean, that's why narration is so clean. It's supposed to be a dude in like a soundproof room telling us a story,
mm-hmm.
and then you have a chase scene, you're going to have, you know, ambient noise. That's a good point.
Yeah, and Derek, something else you said that really struck me is the like really taking time to notice sound and to be inspired by it, and bring that into your work. You know.
Yeah. Well, if you think about, like, when I shot my, I think it was at lesson 5, with the chase scene.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Yeah, and so in the chase scene, I could record the video, but not include the sound of the footsteps, and how dramatically that would change the chase scene.
It's huge. Yeah, because I did the same thing in mine, because it was, you know, the restriction, so to speak, the obstacle was shoot it with a smartphone. Well, right off the bat, then there's no sound. At least because I shot outdoors and it was windy and I was, you know, moving with my actors, and so there's just no way in hell I'm getting any. There was zero sound, and in 10 hours I'm not gonna like Foley this stuff or anything, you know. So it's so yeah, I mean, that's a huge impact. That's a tough one. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's kind of. I mean, I wish we had so much more time to discuss some of these things. Of course, we could. You know, you could go on and on for quite a long time about each one of these topics, but we'll do our best to kind of at least touch on them all. So, moving from sound to music, whether it was for this intensive or for assignment 5 or for something that you've worked on in the past, I mean, all of these experiences are valid. So it's, you know, don't worry if you've not finished a film for this particular intensive. Did you choose music for your short film? And if so, what? So were you ever involved in the choosing of music for a project, for a short film or for a feature film? And kind of talk to us about that experience. Anyone?
I did. I directed A Streetcar Named Desire a couple of years ago for Burned, and it was really cool. Like, I hadn't been at the helm of anything in a long time, and one of the things I love to do, I know Werner talks about this, where you shouldn't just hire all your friends to do stuff, but I've got a lot of really talented friends. I've got a really talented group of actors that are kind of close to me, and musicians too. So, and it was cool because it was a Swiss production in Bern, you know, in the capital of Switzerland. But I was like getting the girl that did the painting for the poster is in Colorado, and all the music came from Colorado. I was able to draw on all my friends to drag in this music to create the mood for it. And it's the same thing I'm doing with my short, is grabbing music from this bunch of friends from all over the place. Some of them are in Zurich, some of them are in Colorado. I have a lot of talented friends, so I don't have so much the issue of, oh man, do we have to pay for that, or that kind of stuff like that. I usually, if I need an acoustic guitar or a piano piece or something punky or anything, I've got a good group of about a half a dozen people that I can bug and say, hey, let me look through your stuff, because I've got about 9 hours of music from my friends that should fit somewhere. I actually spent some of the morning doing that, going through my friend Kevin's stuff just to try to find something that fit the mood.
Yeah, yeah. Anybody else have any experiences with either creating or selecting music for a project?
I did this short film, and it was an educational film, and I had to use catalog music, and I spent days at this place. And this was before digital. It was a little bit back, but I spent days at this place listening to tracks that they had before I found stuff that I thought was would work for what I was trying to do. And so finally, I eventually seized upon stuff that would work, but it took time to find what I really wanted.
Yeah,
that's what it takes the most of is time, because you basically have to listen to everything to know whether or not it's going to fit.
yeah, and and I'll call out a couple things here in the chat room. I apologize, I'm a little bit behind, but Colin brings up an interesting point. I mean, really, it's like sound, whether we're talking about sound effects, Foley, dialogue, music. That sound is almost more important than the visual in a sense. And we kind of touched on that an audience is forgiving if there's issues with the visual, but if there's issues with the sound, just forget about it. You're going to lose an audience. Yeah, Colin kind of talks about that in the chat room. It's interesting. Kitty says, that Kitty's noticed that in big budget movies, there's some movies that have poor quality or uneven sound. Have you guys ever, I'm trying to think of any like big budget movies that I've seen that I thought, wow, the sound really sucks on this. I'm sure there's some.
I can't think of examples, but man, we've seen some stuff recently where my wife just turned to me and was like, why was that explosion so loud? Or like, why is this voiceover deafening? And then they go into a loud like subway.
Yeah, I've noticed that sometimes on some of the big productions, the sound is imbalanced.
Yeah.
I wonder if they do like a different sound edit for theaters versus like home stereo.
The theater might not really be the right. Theaters are different, even if they have it synced out that there's going to be 12 speakers, there's 12 tracks in the theater. It might not be right, or where you're sitting in terms of different speakers. It can be daunting sometimes. I find that on the home screen, sometimes the sound is not, you can't, the dialogue doesn't play well, and so, it's just by the time it gets to the home screen, even if you're using a great delivery system, it's not always clear.
Yeah, I've definitely had that problem too, where mix is a big issue. We bring it from a theater into your home. And then if everybody's got a different theater system, and then of course with streaming versus physical media, I mean, there's a whole, it can be sometimes really challenging for the creator's intent to make it all the way to the audience's ears, for sure. I'll just throw out one thing. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I try to do 2 tests. Or 3 tests where if something doesn't work in my earphones, then I know that it doesn't work. And then if something works on my computer, but it doesn't sound good on my TV, then it doesn't work. I mean, it's the same thing also with your contrast too, your color. You have to look at it in your editing suite, and then you have to test it on the YouTube and on the TV. If it doesn't work somewhere, then there's something wrong.
Yeah. It's true, and I think have you guys any of you ever worked with hired or otherwise, like worked with like a third party, so to speak, to do your sound on any films? Have you guys have any experience with that, or have you all done? Maybe Tom, you have, but have the other guys versus doing it yourself?
Do you mean actually recording or
Well, I mean,
using
I guess, kind of in my mind, yeah, sure, recording, but also, working with other people to actually mix and master the sound for your projects. Have you ever kind of worked in a capacity of communicating your vision to another group of people or other? Yeah, I was just wondering because it's a different kind of.
Yeah, that's actually.
Oh, go ahead, Derek.
I was going to say that's actually a pretty interesting question. The one thing that I often kind of have thought about myself is I've gone through extensive online courses to figure out how to edit sound the right way versus like what I'm doing from the point of recording to final edit. Like, how can I improve that? And if I had hired a sound guy who's going to do both the recording and the mixing and the end, how does it get better than what it is that I'm already doing? That's something I'm actually not that sure about.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, I think it's, at a certain point, as your projects reach a certain size, I mean, obviously you've got to start to delegate. And let's say if you're in the role of director, ultimately you're not going to be able to be everywhere at once. And I think, one of the challenges too is, I don't know, can we be experts at every single aspect of filmmaking? The answer is probably certainly no, at least for me. I'd be lucky if I were able to master one small aspect of it, much less every aspect of it. But there is definitely a skill, in the same way that any director's goal or director's challenge is to communicate, to have a vision, first of all, to have a strong opinion, to have a vision, and then to be able to communicate that vision to different heads of departments and different, and all of your actors and everything. So it's, yeah, I was just wondering if anybody had any experience doing that they would share.
I think a lot of people in this class are kind of doing this sort of one-man band kind of thing.
Probably, yeah.
That's what I'm doing, and it is tough. Like, I know when I made my 5 short, my first test in my assignment 5 short, I was so busy trying to direct and do camera work that my acting was horrible, and then my sound was completely ignored. Like, completely ignored. You can't wear too many hats at the same time. And if you're trying to act and direct and
Yeah.
then why do you think you can do sound? And
it's tough, yeah. I mean, I would say most of us probably do it out of necessity, right? I mean, you kind of in the beginning, but it's good. I think that's good. I mean, you want to be able to understand all of these aspects of filmmaking to a point so that you can communicate with the people who are experts. That you've at least had some experience. You've kind of gotten your hands dirty in all these areas. I think that's important. You're not afraid of a camera. You're not afraid of lighting. You understand screenwriting a little. All of these things are important. It's unrealistic that it's just impossible. I'll just go out on a limb and say it's absolutely impossible for anybody to be an expert at all of these things. Certainly to be better at it than somebody who's dedicated their life doing it. That's just impossible.
Well, you have people like Herzog, or let's say Woody Allen, who basically makes like a movie a year. Like, he directs and sometimes stars in it, but he doesn't also like do the music and the casting and everything,
Right. Yeah, for sure.
I dropped this down on the chat room there. Something I suggest, if you're gonna like focus on sound a lot, I have a file I can send you, and it's just the sound from George Lucas's first film, THX 1138.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't care if you're walking around or reading a book or something. Just the sound from that film, like, evokes all of the images from that film. The sound on that film is why they named THX Sound after that film. That film's sound.
Definitely post that. Definitely post that link.
Another thing is, if you watch that movie without the sound, it means absolutely nothing. That film is the images are married to the sound and vice versa.
And that was Walter Murch. He was collaborating with, right? On that film.
I'm sorry?
Walter Murch was his editor.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I think so.
I think it was, yeah.
I think back in the beginning they worked together.
Wow, and I would say too. I was just going to add to this. Yeah, please post that. And in addition, before I forget, let me say it. There's actually a website somewhere. I'm going to have to dig it up, and I can post it after the fact, that actually has the audio of, I don't know, probably hundreds of films.
Really?
Yeah, just the audio. This is something that I did even before I found this website. I used to rip them off DVD, rip the audio off the DVD and just listen to it. But it's a really cool experience, actually, to do that. And then the opposite, to watch a film without any audio, to separate those things. But yeah, I'll post that website. There's a website where people have stripped the audio out of hundreds of films, and it's really nicely categorized and listed, and you can kind of really focus on studying the audio, the sound design, and the recording quality of these films. And it's something I really recommend. It's been a good thing for me. So
one thing, just thinking off what everybody's talking about and what Werner discusses, the idea of the sound having a point of view, just as the camera has a point of view, if it's silent, and you can implicate that someone's not listening or not hearing, and that's like a real simple one, but they're just, where the sound is in the room, there's so many things you can do with what is the point of view of the sound in a scene.
Yeah, it's so key. I guess, well, we probably ought to kind of move on here, unfortunately. But let's go on into editing. So lesson 17. So we can kind of share some experiences. And we'll start off with maybe just some practical tips or tricks that you guys have picked up in your experiences with editing. Something that you wish you would have known when you first started out. And you get like 10 hours or 100 hours into a project, you're like, oh damn, I wish I would have known this. If you guys have any experiences like that you'd like to share?
With editing?
Yeah.
So, well, editing is actually kind of interesting. I think one of my first experiences with editing that really, like, where the light bulb went on was, I think it was about 6 or 7 years ago. I made a short about mad cow disease, and I had went out and gathered and maybe an hour's worth of footage, and I knew nothing about editing except that it needed to get done, and I tried to do cut myself, and just felt like I was really failing. And then I found someone to come in and edit for me, whose job was just doing editing, and it was like, wow, it totally switched, like, the direction. Like, I was able to communicate what I wanted, and the editor pulled it together for me. And I was like, you know what? I was thinking editing really is like one of those skill sets that if you can direct an editor and you can afford to have an editor, that's one of the things as part of your projects that I would say not try and take on if you can. And the other thing is too, is I remember Werner speaking about having a second person to give you a second look at things. That's a real objective view. And that's something also a good editor will be able to do for you. Look at the takes, make a decision. So, once they get into cutting things, they'll be able to know if it's good or bad.
Yeah, that's something that's been frustrating to me, like directing and editing, like I say, and also doing sound and everything else. Like, I don't have an objective viewpoint on almost anything I've done. Basically, almost everything I've done has either been all my own, or it's been me, and it's been between 2 or 3 other people. And you have to sift through it. It's as time consuming as Tom was saying music is. Like, you basically have to just sit and make sure you know which takes are good, and where it's mostly a lot of technical stuff after that too. You find the good take, and then you find what's technically going to work. Yeah, I wish I could farm that out to somebody. Half the time I'm like, hey, I filmed this. Why don't you guys cut this? Because it's not. I do enjoy it. There's a meditative state I hit when I'm doing it, but being able to have an objective editor, I imagine, would be just a giant asset, just a huge asset.
Yeah. Tom, what about you?
I've edited all my films that I made, and I found that I would get into a meditative state at a certain point where I'd really get into flow with the editing and feel more that I'm with that material, and very subjective to whatever I was trying to do. And right now I'm really, I was an adept editor. I'm an adept editor using cutting film, and real film. And now digitally, I use Photoshop, and I do tons of things digitally, and editing digitally has not been something that I'm really like right now trying to get over that hurdle. Have in some ways, but I can assemble things, but I'm working on that. So
Well, Tom, that's a really interesting perspective you have on this, because I'm going to go out there and venture a guess that most of the people who are part of this conversation here and are listening and in this class in total, probably most people have very little to no experience working with film, much less actually cutting film. I would say probably all of us are used to working on some kind, whether it's like Final Cut or Premiere or Avid, maybe, if they're a little more professional, or, some other, even I guess maybe iMovie or some things like that. So I'm curious, what do you feel like has been some of the major challenges kind of shifting from working with film to working digitally for you?
I don't want to, I think it's just, I don't really know. I mean, it's a mystery to me why this, of all the things whether it's WordPress or, there's like all these programs that I have sitting here on my homepage on the bottom, and then there's Premiere, and,
Yeah.
but I think there's something about the digital abstraction of the shot versus the concrete existence of the shot, and just taking the shot in its physical form and moving it, and not syncing it to that into this realm. I don't want to waste too much time on it. I think it's just something.
Okay, I was just curious. Yeah, because it's work. Yeah, because I think most people don't have experience working with editing with film. So I was just curious. But yeah, and Cullen in the chat room kind of points out, he says, the best tip about editing I can give is, if you have the opportunity, don't cut to something, let the camera find it. Sometimes the lack of a cut can be really powerful. And that's true. And I think that's, to bring that into a more general comment, it's just, yeah, I think that's really that's really the art of it, is knowing when to cut, knowing when not to. And yeah, I mean, that's right. There's a million choices you can make at any moment when you're editing a film. And what you don't do can be just as important, if not more so, than what you do. I just said do. Awesome. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. In my experience, I have edited most of my own. I've worked on projects where there were other editors, and then I've edited my own stuff. I've kind of done both things. I know that when I work on my own stuff, I sometimes have a real inclination or a real urge to go immediately from shoot to literally, like, I want to run into I want to import all my footage and look at it immediately and start thinking, right away. And I think it really is helpful, at least for me, to take some time, if I can, if I'm not being paid by somebody else to do something and I've got a deadline, to take time and go do something entirely different, to try to take your mind away from it, and try to look at this footage, try to get a fresh set of eyes, or freshen your own eyes, I guess, so to speak. I think that can be pretty helpful. I know when I work on especially narrative fiction stuff, and especially if I've been the person who wrote it or was a part of the writing of it, and then I also directed it, I can get so specific in my own mind's eye of how I see something going down that I unless I really consciously work at it, I narrow my options down. By the time I'm editing, it's like I've seen it, and I've seen it for so long that I don't consider other options for things by the time I get into editing. And it's probably not for the best, you know, a lot of times, because maybe that's kind of the low hanging fruit, so to speak. That's not the more creative, you know, that's not the more interesting way to do something. That's not the more interesting or unique perspective. There's no counterpoint to that. There's no subtext to that. It's a very obvious or a very strictly spatial way to edit, as opposed to a more emotional way to edit, right? Anyway,
Yeah, like you have to try unconventional stuff, and you have to try to push yourself as much as you can. And it's really hard, you know, like without this external, you know, objective editor that's not yourself. It's really hard to decide, well, what haven't I done before, and why would it work here? And you know, why haven't I done that before? Or, you know, I mean, even just down to transitions, man. Like, does this need a crossfade, or should I do some cheesy wipe or a roll, or you know, like it? I think it's a valid thing to try to push yourself as an editor.
Sure.
And once you get yourself in a mindset about something, man, it's really hard to strip yourself, you know, to take yourself out of it.
Well, the thing that Werner said is along those lines. Is just like, you know, you walk in and you look at the stuff and you just say, well, what did this guy shoot? And you find this kind of detachment, or try to find that detachment from, and not be locked in and be romanced by whatever that track you were on in your mind as you were shooting, or whatever. It's hard. You know, I say the same thing about writing scripts, that, you know, once you have an outline, that you're just the guy that you hired to write the script, write the page that day, or that, you know, write the draft. So you kind of want to find that flow in some kind of detachment from that other part of you. And it's not easy to do. I mean, you know, and not all people are meant to work that way. Some people are going to be always on that singular vision that they had when they were shooting, or when they were imagining what it was going to be. So everybody's different, I think, in that way.
Yeah, it's important to drop that and treat everything like it's found footage.
Yeah.
Treat it like it's found footage, then I mean, that is as objective as you can be. And you're like, well, I have this footage. Whoever gave me this footage, and you know it's yourself, but this is what I have to work with, and what can I get out of it? And I think that's,
you know, one thing too, when it comes to being objective and editing your own work, one of the things that I like to do is, and I think Werner mentions this in one of the lessons, about having a reference or a piece of inspiration, a film or something, like an ultimate goal, that's something that you really like about it, and the timing, you know, and you know, when you find that piece of work that you really like, a favorite movie or a short or something, really study the timing of the editing. Look at the edit, you know, you put your eyes as, I'm looking at how this was edited, and then think about that, and then apply that same timing to your own editing. And then, you know, of course, you'll have a range of different inspirational works that you like, and you'll find something. Like, for instance, this year I shot a whole bunch of corporate videos all over the country. I never shot a corporate video before. So I asked the client to find me a couple of pieces they really liked. I looked at those, and I used those as a guide to create the work that I created, and you know, shot around that idea, and then of course edited around that idea. So I think that's going to be a really valuable tool, and I've always used over the years, and just about all my clients in stills and motion, we all have talking points around inspirational work that's already been done to create the new work.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. Yeah, and I think, you know, and I think that advice or idea would apply to sound and music as well. You know, and it's interesting to try to find some other works that you can point to communicate a tone or idea that, you know, may, you know, it's like if we're talking about sound, for instance, you can point to a painting, or if you're talking, you know, something where there requires at least a couple layers of interpretation between, so that whoever you're communicating to has to actually really apply their artistic interpretive skills. I think you could run into some dangers by pointing to, I want my movie to sound exactly like this movie, or I want, you know what I mean? It's nice to have some layers. It's kind of interesting to give some more abstract inspirations to somebody, because I think the idea is that you're always, at least, what I hope, the hope is that whoever, whether it's the editor that you're communicating to or whoever else you're communicating to, that you're really bringing them along to put to bear the entirety of their artistic talents and make whatever you're doing even greater. I don't know, it's kind of a tangent from because you're talking about doing something yourself, and working with a client. But anyway, that's what that made me think of. Sorry about that.
I think having frame of reference and, which can express the things that are hard to express, and just, juxtapositions. And yeah, I mean, I think that's great. I feel like I should do that more with my own work. Yeah,
that would be interesting, to kind of like find these things almost to communicate to yourself, that's interesting.
I think it's more helpful than a storyboard. I know that with my primary client that I've directed a few music videos for and done a lot of work with, he's presented me like, hey, I want it to look like this Tangerine Dream video, or here's a video a buddy of mine had of him in the studio. And we went to shoot in the studio while they recorded a new album. And it's like, well, cool, I can do that. It's shaky and blurry. To be able to get, it's like that vision board, storyboard type stuff. It's really helpful. I think both in terms of sound and in framing and everything. To have something that is a common foundation that y'all have to try to work from. If it's supposed to be really moody, it's really easy to talk about it in the vocabulary of these other things that are really moody. It's like the first thing I cut, it was supposed to kind of look like the opening of the Kids in the Hall, where it's
love the Kids in the Hall.
Yeah,
it was a music video about streets, and there's a lot of movement in that, and it's supposed to be a little desaturated and kind of like 90s.
Totally. Yeah, that's great. And I think those things are so great. It just the devil's advocate of that is that you've always got to be careful to create, be weary of creating too derivative. Your work is too derivative, and that's where I think sometimes it's an interesting tool to use inspiration, use other works as inspiration that are a couple levels removed from, if you're trying to inspire sound, pick paintings or sculpture or a landscape, or, if you're trying to evoke a certain type of editing, a piece of music for rhythm, instead of make it look like this film, or make it, I think sometimes we see it, this is me, just my soapbox, but I think we see so many films now whose only inspiration seems to be other films.
Mm-hmm.
That it's this snake eating its own tail, that we just have films that are just referencing other films that referenced other films that referenced other films. I don't know, that's my own personal, but I think that's one of the things that makes Herzog's films really stand out, and I think speak to people over time as much as they have, is that, you can say a lot of things about them, but they're singular. These are not derivative films generally, right? So anyway, time is marching on, and we'll go to our next topic. But everybody, great points on all this stuff. It's really interesting things you guys are bringing up.
I had one last thing on that.
Yeah, please. Yeah, please.
When it comes to putting all this stuff together in your edit, and Tom, I also come from the film era, so I have cut film and
oh wow,
in the past, and I've kind of embraced digital like 1,000%, because when you go into a program like Final Cut or Avid, you can create like film looks, and when you do your grading, you can grade a whole scene and save it as an option. So you can make a whole bunch of different options. So that way, when you're working on your process of getting towards something that you want, you have a really quick reference of reviewing what you're doing. Because a lot of times we haven't mentioned anything about process yet in the editing. So I was thinking that was a good thing to mention that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's, certainly, again, I mean, we could talk for so long, and we haven't really touched much on the actual practical logistics of any of these things, like recording sound, dropping in music, editing music into a cut, or how does music affect your editing and vice versa, or how do we actually literally use these different software applications, how do we actually edit? I feel like, my goodness, right, with only an hour to touch on all these things, it's impossible to really get into any of the
how to create your feature in an hour.
Yeah, I mean, it's just completely impossible. And maybe somewhere down the line, I mean, this class as presented, and certainly, Herzog never gets into really much of a practical application of anything. I mean, I think that, this class is really kind of more a philosophy of making film versus how to technically put together a film. But maybe there is a place for more of those kind of discussions, because clearly I see on Facebook and other places that people have a lot of questions. I mean, you still, no matter what your philosophy is of filmmaking, you still have to get the damn thing made. And there's a lot of technical process there that could be worth discussing. But unfortunately, we don't have a ton of time for that here. So we'll move on to Invaded by Images. And so the world reveals itself to those who travel on foot, is, I think, a quote from Herzog himself. And one of the assignments was to travel 100 miles on foot. At least that was way back whenever the original course book came out. I think they've changed it now to a softer, less intimidating, like long travel a long distance on foot.
Sometime in your life, it's not go do that next weekend.
Which I'm saddened by. So so for those people who joined later and got the older course book, I'm going to say, just let everybody know, it used to say, like, walk 100 miles and do it right now. It literally said, like, pick a direction from your home and start walking. It's like what it said.
But didn't it also say for an essential purpose too?
Yes.
That's what it says now.
Yeah. Now, I can't remember if it said essential purpose. I like that part because, of course, this kind of comes from Herzog's experience of traveling on foot to go visit this German theater critic, if I'm not mistaken. I forget her name right now, but she had played a very big part in the revitalization and kind of giving credibility to German filmmaking after World War II, and played a big part in Herzog's early inspiration and success, I think. And so he walked to see her when she was ill and dying, in fact. And in kind of the mythology that this has in his mind is that, because he walked to see her, it kind of saved her life. And I'm not explaining this very well, but you should listen to him tell the story or read it where he's recanted it somewhere, because he retells it often. Anyway, so kind of making a jump here, we kind of talked about sound, music, editing, kind of a little more trees, and this is kind of a little more forest, which is kind of where do we get our inspiration for storytelling, in effect, right? So what do you guys think about this? Have any of you, first, I guess I would ask, have either of the three of you done the assignment or something similar to it?
I've, to me, like I don't know if you noticed how I was about assignment 5. I'm kind of the same way about this assignment, and where I really nitpick all the vocabulary of what it is. He says an essential purpose, a significant distance, and on foot. And I think it also, at some point, it at least implies that you're alone. And it hit me the other day that I used to walk to and from work every day between 45 minutes one way and 2 hours. I used to have to walk 2 hours to go to work and stand on my feet all day and then walk 2 hours home. So that puts you at like a 12-hour day, and 4 hours of that was all just me and some earphones if I'd remembered to charge my MP3 player or whatever the case was. And I think being on foot, I think his point is that, like that quote you just quoted is, the world reveals itself to somebody it's just a man with a pair of boots. Hopefully he has pants on and he's moving through the world, Like, I think that's a lot of what life is about, is hopefully I'm going somewhere. There's a point A and a point B, and hopefully I have pants on in the process. I think it's important,
Yeah. What about you guys, Derek, Tom? Thoughts on this?
I've done a lot of walking to do photography, where I was kind of searching for images and trying to figure out, so I tend to do that, and I lately have been more prone to try and figure out a walk than to actually do it, because of where I live. I've kind of walked everything that I'm sort of, I need a new terrain to walk in, which I'm working on right now. But yeah, I did not do the exercise for this purpose. So I will, and I won't walk 100 miles, but I think maybe I'll walk, 2 miles or 5 miles.
Well, if my own, the way I interpreted it, and I know that he didn't walk 100 miles all at once, without stopping. And so I certainly would not interpret it that way. When I did it, it was coincidentally, I got into this class, and my wife and I had a trip where we spent about 3 weeks in Chicago and Toronto and Niagara Falls. And so I used that as an opportunity to do, I don't know, about in between 100 and 150 miles in Chicago and Toronto and Niagara Falls.
Oh, wow.
And over the course of about 10 days, about 15 miles a day was all, I think we had a couple of days where there were 20 miles. That physically starts to get.
Wait, so the two of you would do a 15-mile walk in Chicago?
Yeah, just everywhere. And in Toronto and Niagara Falls as well. Yeah. So we traveled everywhere on foot, everywhere.
Oh.
And
Niagara Falls, you walked all along the water there and those parks down, those old parks.
Yeah, and even through the old town. We took the train from Toronto to Niagara Falls, and it drops you off in this practically abandoned town, not the tourist part.
Yeah.
And everybody else the street is just filled with taxis. So everybody gets off the train and takes taxis. We walked everywhere.
That was inspired by this course. You decided you were going to just do that.
It was, yeah. I knew about the assignment. I had just got the class, and it was, just a few weeks within, because I'd kind of read through the class, the workbook, and I wasn't at that assignment yet, but I had this opportunity. And like you, I was like, well, walking around in Los Angeles, this will be fun to do this in cities that I'm not familiar with.
Yeah.
I'd been to Chicago, but not since I was a child, and I'd never been to Toronto. And so, yeah, just use it as an opportunity to do that.
What was what percolated during your journeys?
Well, I think, what I think for me, like, I've thought about this quite a bit. I think that I kind of liken it to a meditation, but there's some things that are interestingly different about it. As a meditation, I think that walking, it puts you in your body, and it puts you in a certain state of being present, and that state of being present really heightens your awareness of what's going on around you. It really heightens your senses, and it slows you down. I think that we live, especially if you kind of say, okay, I'm going to walk, and I'm not going to have earbuds in, and I'm not going to be looking at my phone every 5 seconds, and I'm not going to be checking my GPS to see where I'm going. I'm going to be paying attention to what's going on around me. And so it's like I think that really we live in a day and age, in a culture where it's just focus on destination, right? Traveling is not about the journey. None of us really travel for the sake of the journey. We're always traveling because we've got to get somewhere. Mm-hmm. I got to go to the store. I got to go to work. I got to go, right? So we do it in the fastest way possible. traveling is not about the adventure or the experience or the journey, or even about moving through the world and finding new things and connecting to new people and observing the stories that are going on around us everywhere. We lose that. It's just rush, 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 rush. And so for me, it was like interesting in that it was a meditation. I think it really heightened my awareness of what was going on around me. But instead of, you know, hiding away in some monastery or being at the top of some mountain, you know, it was a meditation that put me right in the middle of all of these stories that were going on around me. And, you know, you talk to people you would never talk to. If you really allow yourself to talk to that person that's on the corner, to, you know, buy that homeless person a hot dog at 7-Eleven and hear their story for a half hour, I found it to be really inspirational. Yeah, and because I mean, look, you know, on a personal level, I mean, my greatest challenge is inspiration. My personal greatest challenge is finding stories that I am passionate enough about that they will drive me through the process of making a film, because making a film is some hard-ass work that takes a long-ass time. And so you've really got to have a story that you're passionate about telling, or else what the hell's the purpose? Why put yourself through all this torture? I found this was a pretty interesting way to bring some of that inspiration into my life.
So would you make yourself think about a project or projects, or were you looking for things to come up as you were going, or did you just clear out everything?
I think mostly the latter, really. To just really feel the ground beneath your feet, feel the breeze in your face, listen to the birds and or the cars, wherever the hell it is you are, and really notice things around you, whether it's architecture or the weather, other people, everything. I mean, we live in such a world that's so rich with so much, but I think we're just inundated with so much shit, you know, our texts and phone calls and emails, and it's really hard to kind of to slow down and take notice of things and be emotionally impacted. I think is the biggest thing. Not just that you notice things, but that you really take the time and allow yourself to be emotionally impacted by the things that are the stories that are in the world with us.
Yeah, I'm a Buddhist, and there's a whole meditation that surrounds exactly what you're talking about. Be present. Feel your feet as they hit the ground. Feel your breathing as it moves. And, you know, like Tom says, like, what do you check out, or did you have things that you're trying to work out? You kind of do both of those and try to balance them, and you try not to run into things or other people or into roads or anything. There's a whole like style of meditation that's called walking meditation, and it's all about exactly that. Knowing where you are at the time that you're in transit, going from that point A to that point B. And I think you have to do that. I think everybody should do that. There's also driving meditation too, which doesn't sound very good, because like, why, you know, you're zoning out while you're driving, you know, meditation while driving. I think there's this valid point, trying to be a conscious individual during some process that you're undertaking. And I think that's what everything, not just filmmaking or anything like that, is about. I mean, at the Buddhist temple I lived at, we did conscious eating, you know, not just like meditative walking, but everything that we did during this one program I was in was all about meditation. Even if you were picking your nose, it was a meditation, you know?
Yeah.
Well, I think also I can't even tell you how many times I've done walks like this. I've, you know, gone to India. I've walked 3 months across India.
Amazing.
My first trip was in Europe. You know, I didn't walk everywhere, but I would take the train somewhere, and then I would be on foot for 3 or 4 days. You know, walking is a wonderful way to find introspective and, you know, get your mindset in a place to become present. But I'm going to throw something back at you guys a little bit, because nature can be as distracting as living in the middle of New York City.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if
I
you
live in the middle of a valley, and it is exactly that way. And
yeah, I mean, it really can be. So
yeah,
I think there's no one way to get inside your own mind and find a good, peaceful place where you can become productive and make good decisions for yourself and for your projects.
Yeah, interesting. And I'll just go off of that. I wondered if there's, for me, I didn't use it so much as a way to get inside, so quote unquote, to inside my own mind. I kind of actually used it to get outside myself.
Yeah.
Really, actually. I find that actually my problem is not so much a lack of introspection, it's too much.
Mm-hmm.
For me, if that sounds, does that, not to be like pithy about it, but do you know what I think that it's too, for me, the walking helped me get get my mind outside of myself, get into the world and notice the stories outside of me more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but there's a place certainly for, I mean, all of these things are required, right? You've got
Mm-hmm.
to also find a solitude within yourself in order to be able to work. No question. Let me just take a couple seconds here to read a couple things that people said in the chat room real quick. So Colin was talking about how he was walking, stumbled across an old abandoned house in the middle of a forest. He'd lived here in his entire life. I'm assuming not in the middle of the forest. He'd lived there for his entire life. Well, that would be a really cool story, Colin. If you lived out in the middle of a forest your entire life, please tell us about that. But he said he never knew it existed. And he used it for some of his short films. And I think that that's just a specific example of kind of, one of the things that you can benefit from by walking around and kind of taking more time to journey. You'll discover things that you were right under your nose that you never even knew existed, inspirations for things. And then what's this? Kitty's telling a story. She said, I'm just going to read this. I don't know where it's going to go. So we'll see. Hopefully I don't butcher this up. So once while I was 8 months pregnant with my first child, had sciatica, she walked 2 miles, entered a Rouse, and encountered at the checkout a friend from about 3,000 miles away. And she went to an apartment with her husband, was sequestering Patty Hearst.
What?
Yeah, and had an interesting, that was a pretty interesting walk.
Wow.
And so, yeah, I guess that's just another example of how, if you kind of put yourself out there in the world and you allow yourself to kind of be taken places that are different than, just this A to B, okay, I'm going to go to the store and I'm going to buy my thing and I'm going to come right back. Sometimes you never know what experiences and adventures lie out there for you. You know what I mean?
You could come home with Stockholm Syndrome for all you know.
Oh wow. So we're pretty much at a time where we should wrap, guys. It's a couple after 11. But any final thoughts on any of this stuff? And you guys have all had really great insight and stories that you've shared, and I know I really appreciate it, and I think probably everybody else does too. But any last parting thoughts here before we head out?
If anybody wants to check my posting about the burglars, I think I posted it in the masterclass forum as well as the Facebook group A, because I know we're out of time. So, but I did have a few things to say about that too. So.
Yeah. Okay. Great. And you said, where's that posted again? Is it on the Facebook?
Yeah, I put it in. I'm pretty sure I posted in Group A or whichever assignment number it was, and I also tried to repost it in the masterclass forum directly. Okay. So
we'll take a look at that.
We'll take a look, and don't forget to post those sound things that you're going to put them in the Facebook page. That's the soundtrack, the THX, and the other soundtrack.
Yeah, I'm actually gonna.
I'll see if I can. I just have a big file that I made off of a RIP of THX. So I wonder if there's a good forum. Maybe I just put that on my SoundCloud or something and make it downloadable for everybody.
Yeah, that'd be great.
What I'll try to do too is that I think there's a way I can post the recording of this on the Facebook page for those people who were unable to see it live, and then along with that, I will also post a link of the website that has all of the audio rips. Cool. It also, which is just kind of an aside, but still really cool, it's actually got the commentary tracks for a ton of films too. So for those people who are into commentary tracks, sometimes, when they're good, they can almost kind of be like a free film school, So yeah, all right. Well, everybody, again, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate all of your thoughts and the discussion. It was really fun. I really enjoyed it. And I wish you all a great rest of your weekend. And here's to being soldiers of cinema this week. Soldier on, everybody, and we'll talk soon.
Okay, great meeting you guys. Thanks for
Take care.
Likewise.
Yeah.
Likewise. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.